registered probably.
No, I'm not. I meant to register, but I didn't. I was thinking I was going to just pay on my own to go, but I never got around to it because I was wondering, if I was going to have time during the day to do any of the virtual workshops. But no, I just got an email welcoming to
like Kelly and I.
They're just telling us all now we are going to attend. Apparently.
That's right. It's like if you say it, you can manifest it. So they're just trying to manifest their attendees.
Right.
So Sarah, you heard Dan. He also received it.
I did. And
I'm forward it to you right now.
We are live on YouTube.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. We are live.
Hi, Jeff and Lisa and Mary. Hey, Rebecca.
Hi.
Hey, Mark.
Hello.
Six o'clock, so I'll call the meeting to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible,
under God,
with liberty and justice for all. All right, next on the agenda is the approval or revision of the agenda for this evening. Is there a motion to approve or revise the agenda for this evening? Kelly first, and a second from Daryl. Any discussion of the agenda? All those in favor, please raise your hand, indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? Okay. Next on the agenda is public comment. Sarah, do we have anyone for public comment this evening?
We do not.
Thank you. Okay, moving on then to item 2.01, report from our claims auditor. Catherine Phelps will present on claims auditing in the district from January through June of 2020 and July through September of 2020.
Just getting Catherine admitted to the meeting.
Good.
Thank you.
This is the first time some of the board members have met her, correct?
Correct.
Bill, do you want to do a little background or do you want me to?
If you want to, that's fine, Daryl.
Okay.
Your preference.
Katie, can you unmute and show your video, please?
There we go.
Yeah, she is.
Hi, Katie, you're live on YouTube with the Board of Education.
Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for making time for us tonight, Katie.
Oh, certainly.
This is something the board decided years ago that they would like to have a report annually. We usually shoot for September, but we had a different September, so we're in October. But Katie has come to us. It'll be a year in January, correct?
Yes.
She retired actually from the Liverpool Central Schools after, I think, am I remembering right, 34 years of education, and her last job was assistant superintendent in charge of business. So she was what our Bill Furlong is to Liverpool. And now she's our claims auditor. So Katie, would you like to give your report?
Yes, certainly. I believe Sarah forwarded you the 2 documents that were prepared for the audit committee. And I tried to capture an executive summary from January. The first report is January through June of 2020. And just to show the volume of audits that have taken place, 166 warrants were examined. I look at every document that the board is ultimately authorizing to pay. So, and there are the payroll weeks and the non-payroll weeks, and every document I am presented with needs to be in complete order in order to be processed and then paid. And if we find any findings, they're recorded and reported, and I work with the appropriate parties to get them corrected and fixed so that we can get those bills paid and move on. And I would like to compliment the business office staff and the leadership of the district. They're a wonderful group to work with. Everyone is very cooperative, and everybody wants to do their job in a very professional manner. So again, the first report captures January through June, and you can see it was 55 million and change worth of bills being paid by the Fayetteville-Manlius district. And there was 2,151 actual claims. And obviously it was a very different year, as we talked about earlier. So the volume has certainly decreased during the March months, and when the staff were not, so present with us in the same format. The next report, you can see, we'll try to get on a yearly schedule here, is the July 1 through September. And we've had over 27 million worth of bills paid. Again, the volume's starting to pick up. There were 95 warrants looked at. Obviously, the percentage of errors shown on the bottom of the report is not alarming or huge, which is what we're fortunate for. And, I monitor the channels, and I'm fortunate because of my experience. And I've always only worked in schools. So I know what schools buy, what teachers need, what staff needs. I'm familiar with the vendors, and I'm familiar with, what they're buying and why they're buying it. So it makes my job simple. And again, in transparency, I am also the internal claims auditor for the East Syracuse-Minot School District. So I see the same vendors, and it makes my job easy. And working again with the staff, they're wonderful to work with. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer.
Apparently not, Katie, but we appreciate your sending us the reports in advance so we could look at them. And do you have any questions for us?
No, if there's anything you ever need or would like something different prepared or presented, please just get me a message or let me know, and I'd be happy to look into that for you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for your reports and the good job you're doing. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Next on the agenda, item 2.02, President's Report. So our board retreat date is November 5th from 6 to 9. We will have Dr. Lavelle Brown as our, as our facilitator for the board retreat. And a little later on the agenda, we will discuss a bit about the agenda for the retreat. I'm happy to say we have our student board member, Lucy Fowler, who will be joining the Board of Education, senior class president. She is also going to participate in the Community Relations Committee and will attend her first meeting tomorrow. I had an opportunity to have a nice chat with her last week, and she's very excited about joining the Board of Education. So glad to have her on board. Also want to wish or say thank you. It's National Bus Safety Week. So I want to extend our thanks and gratitude to all of our bus drivers who bring our children safely to school and other school related events every day. Then as far as public comment. So Sarah and Sherry and I had a conversation in regards to public comment. Normally when we're in person, we have the public comment cards that are given to people who wish to speak before the board. And we thought that it would be, it would help to organize public comment online if we had some sort of electronic card that people who wish to speak to the board could fill out before the board meeting. And then also if, if someone decides to come to a board meeting at the last minute, they could also download it and email it to Sarah at the beginning or before public comment starts. But it would be the same exact public comment card that we use for our in-person meetings. It would just be an electronic version. And that way Sarah can call on individuals who have signed up for public comment to they would still be typing their statement in. They would not be given a verbal statement or appearing on camera, but it would just give a little bit more organization to public comment during our virtual board meetings. So we wanted to suggest that as a process to the board and see if the board was in agreement that we should proceed in that manner. Any thoughts from the board?
And Marissa, Sarah also brought up the idea of using that same application or the same public comment virtually, but then if it's done in advance, it could allow for us to invite them to be in the Zoom meeting for their allotted amount of time so they could say their words in person rather than being read out loud. So that's another option.
Great idea.
I agree. Any way we can get our community to be involved with us would be great.
Do we have consensus on whether or not we want people to continue to read their comment or type their comments into the YouTube stream, or does the board want to have people be able to make their comments as part of a public comment session where they would be on the screen during the meeting? That might take some logistics to work out, because then you'd have to have their information beforehand to send them the link to the meeting, have them in the meeting room, and then let them in. So that might be a little bit more, that would be a lot more to manage rather than just having people type their comments into the YouTube stream and when it came for their time to be called upon. But I'd like to make sure of which version the board is in favor of before we move forward. Keeping it typed in or actually having people come into the meeting.
I just have a question on that. So I guess in my head, like if we're going to have them fill out a comment card, and email it, or I don't know, have a Google Doc or whatever. I mean, it seems to me that would take the place of the YouTube comments. Because and again, I'm not an expert on how to comment on YouTube, but I mean, if you allow someone to make their comment on YouTube, wouldn't that just open the comments to everybody then? And then you might, I don't know how that works, turning it on, turning it off. What if someone else sneaks in there? Yeah, go ahead, Sarah. I'm sure you know.
The comments are on regardless of how the Board of Education receives public comment. I have some assistants in the background helping manage that. But they're on once we go live on YouTube.
Is that something, not that I'm trying to stifle anybody from speaking, but I guess I'm just concerned about that because there is monitoring and, it's at a regular board meeting that wouldn't be virtual, we wouldn't have those kind of comments where people are responding to each other necessarily during a board meeting. So I guess I'm trying to mimic what would be in person, which would be any comments we would hear from the public would be in that kind of form where they're filling out a card. So I don't know if that's something we have to do or there's some, but I would prefer it just be a little more formalized. I mean, obviously the public can always reach us by emailing the board or emailing Dr. Tice or, you know, but just maybe some more comments on why we're leaving those comments open.
I think if we're going to formalize it, then, you know, one of the challenges with leaving it in the chat part is that that's character limited and it doesn't stop anybody from typing in. And so somebody's quote unquote public comment being split with other comments in between it. So you know, if we can do this logistically, where whether it's a Google Sheet, a live sheet, where they can submit their email and then get it right back to Sarah and do it, that's fine. Obviously the challenge is if people don't have access to being able to submit that is one thing. And yeah, I mean, you could say, well, it's got to be in by 6 p.m. on the day of, but we do also have meetings where we have public comment later on occasion after a presentation where we would be getting public comment based on what a presentation is. So there would have to be some variability in how that's applied based on what the actual agenda is for that meeting in terms of what time they would have to have it in by.
I would favor, if the logistics aren't really burdensome, allowing people to try to speak, maybe giving them an option to present in person if to check that box or not. I just think a lot gets lost when it's typed into a chat, or, you know, something that could be 3 minutes long is put into an email. So I think to the fullest extent we can replicate our meetings, I would advocate for that.
It is doable. To Mr. Seidberg's point, putting a deadline on that would be ideal. Our communications team does post the agendas on our website, and we can certainly promote this change in process and then make sure that we put a time estimate on when public comment will begin so that people know when they will be able to, when they'll be able to join the meeting. Sending them a link is not a problem.
And just to back that up, that Sarah, you were the one who originally brought it up. So that's why I brought it up, that I don't think it would be overly burdensome for you. And in regards to the deadline, normally at a board meeting, if somebody arrived, you know, we usually do public comment at the beginning, and people in normal circumstances would drive over to Eagle Hill and have to be there in time. So, you know, I understand the 6 p.m. deadline with Dan's point that if we decide public comment is later, we would make it an estimated later time. So yes, I'm in favor of the in-person speakers.
I'm in favor of the in-person as well. I like to see a face in front of a question, so that would be my preference.
Yeah, I would also go with the in-person as well. It's always great to see a face and match it to the comment. So if we could logistically do it, that would be great.
Yeah, I agree with Rebecca too. You can read a piece of text one way and say it another. So it's important to see and hear the person.
Okay, so what we will do is we'll write up something to memorialize what we're going to do as far as having the electronic public comment card and the ability for people to give their public comment visually during the virtual board meeting, and get that out to the board before our next meeting so everyone can see that in writing, and then we will make sure that's communicated to the public. Thank you. Last on my report, I have a couple more emails I need to respond to, so I just want to make sure members of the public know that I have not forgotten. I just want to be very careful and thorough in my responses and make sure I've given the correct information. So I am going to make sure I get to those emails, but I do thank the public for sending the board emails and questions. That's always very helpful. That concludes my report. Next on the agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Tice.
Thank you, President Mims. For those eager to follow along, my report is in board docs for your perusal, but I would like to begin off record officially, as some of you know, even though we're unable to be together in the same room and share a celebratory cake for its school board recognition week. So I would like to read the governor's proclamation for you from the executive chamber. Whereas each year, School Board Recognition Week is observed by more than 700 school boards and school districts throughout the Empire State. And whereas our state's public education system is designed to meet the educational needs of all children and to empower them to become competent, productive contributors to society and an ever-changing world. And whereas school boards are currently facing the unprecedented challenges of a pandemic while working closely with educators to prepare our children to learn. And whereas members of local school boards are dedicated to children, learning, and community and devote many hours of service to elementary and secondary public education as they continually strive for improvement, excellence, and progress in education, recognizing that all children can be successful learners, especially when education is tailored to the individual needs of the child. And whereas local school board members are strong advocates for public education and are responsible for communicating the needs of the school district to the public and the public's expectations to the district by working closely with parents, educational professionals, and other community members. And whereas the members of the New York State's local school boards respond to the educational needs of the communities they serve and to help ensure the solid foundation of our school system. In doing so, these leaders help to strengthen our state's educational system and improve future prospects for our children. And whereas during October 19th to the 23rd, 2020, special activities and programs will be held in communities across New York State in observance of School Board Recognition Week, and it is fitting to join in acknowledging the commitment and contributions of members of local school boards. So finally, now therefore, I, Andrew M. Cuomo, Governor of the State of New York, do hereby proclaim October 19th to the 23rd, 2020 is School Board Recognition Week. So even though we're unable to be together and to celebrate with a piece of cake, I'd like to thank all of you on behalf of a grateful community for helping to lead the governance team, especially during this recent pandemic, and for all the efforts that you put forward. So I think that's very important to start off with. Thank you all for your service. Continuing onward with my report, under internal operations, our committee meetings are in full swing, and our policy and community relations committees will meet tomorrow afternoon. In the area of community relations, Dr. Lewin from Children's National Health will be hosting 3 town meetings next week, town hall meetings, in an effort to provide community members with an opportunity to weigh in on the school start time study. Stakeholders will have a chance to discuss the recent focus groups and survey results with Dr. Lewin and his associate, Dr. Temkin, at 2 o'clock Monday afternoon, October 26th, 6:30 on Wednesday evening, October 28th, and 11 a.m. in the morning on Friday, October 30th. We've already posted an article on the district website to that effect. In the area of administration, I'd like to thank our school building administrators who have been diligently working with the Onondaga County Health Department officials to help with the contact tracing. As you may have noticed, in the most recent case, we were able to keep Mott Road Elementary School open thanks to the quick action of the building principal in securing substitute teachers as we worked with Onondaga County. Under non-instructional business operations, with the lack of a federal stimulus package, school district officials are looking into ways to tighten our collective belts regarding discretionary purchases for the remainder of this school year, with our eyes looking ahead to budget development for the upcoming school year. And you will hear more about that later this evening. In the area of personnel, later in this evening's agenda, I will ask you to take action on some personnel items. Those items include, among other official appointments, a series of extracurricular assignments as we endeavor to bring some of those activities back online during the pandemic. So they will parallel what we have started with fall sports. And speaking of fall sports, our student athletes are doing well this year in spite of all the restrictions impacting the fall sports season. Actually, I'd like to extend my congratulations to boys varsity soccer coach, Mr. Jeff Hammond, on his 500th career win. Congratulations, Coach Hammond. In the area of instruction, as many of you realized, I'm pleased to report that Buffalo Business First recognized the Fayetteville-Manlius Central School District is #1 in the Syracuse, Central New York area, and #2 in upstate, second to Pittsburgh, for the 10th consecutive year. And then finally, under strategic planning and construction, as you are aware, National Grid completed its replacement of the electrical service at Wellwood Middle School. Accordingly, Cohort B students returned to school on Thursday, October 15th. Our construction management firm, in other news, would like to invite members of the Board of Education to tour the construction site in the near future. And you can see some of the work that National Grid completed. You may recall that the Facilities Committee participated in a tour earlier in September. So I would ask you to check your calendars, and that goes for both the Facilities Committee and the rest of the board. I'd like to schedule a time, and if we have a quorum, we'll advertise it accordingly to be able to take a tour of the construction site before winter weather sets in. And then last but not least, in terms of focus areas, you asked me, and I know you're developing the goals and we have a retreat set up for early November, what would be some of the focus items? And I would like to thank the board officers for distilling down from my evaluation in June some of the salient points. And after considerable reflection, I think the 3 areas that I've zeroed in on are very important and actually bring closure to some of the things that we've addressed earlier. #1 being the school start time and the long-range facilities plan. I think that's very important as we go forward. The town hall meetings will help to provide some final voice into that decision. And Dr. Lewin will be able to issue a report hopefully mid-year here that will inform our decision-making going forward. Speaking of facilities, I'd also like to focus on that as item 2. I know that the architects and Mr. Furlong and I will be meeting with the building principals in the days ahead. In fact, there's a couple meetings scheduled this week to that effect. And before those principals, we'll meet with the Facilities Committee as we take a look at a potential phase 2 for a capital project down the road, now that phase 1 is into the Wellwood building. And then last but not least, I'd like to focus in on opportunities and to work with our faculty and administration on things that we've talked about during this pandemic as we wrestled with reopening the facilities, maximizing our square footage in each of the buildings, adhering to the guidance from the New York State Department of Health and State Ed, as well as the work of our nurses and school physician and our COVID medical director. I think we have to take all things into consideration. The work that Dr. Coughlin has done and our instructional technology department, working on online learning. I'd like for it to continue into the future. I know we've talked about things like personalized learning before, but I would like to roll up our sleeves this year because as we've talked about at the Facilities Committee, our educational program should drive the decisions on our bricks and mortar. And I think we need to have those tough conversations, think about where we see ourselves in the next 5 to 10 years, and really explore personalized learning. I was delighted to have Dr. Coughlin join the AASA personalized learning virtual meeting the other day. It was ironic for both of us to see former New York State Ed Commissioner Mary Ellen Elia on the call as well. I know that we are working with Dr. McNulty and Dr. Daggett's office and setting up a meeting going forward with our transformational leadership group. And so I think the time is right, given the issues that we've dealt with during the pandemic, as well as the importance of revisiting what it means to personalize education, to provide more voice and choice for the learners as we work with our teaching staff, who is really doing an outstanding job working hard in these less than ideal conditions. So those would be my three focus areas that I'd like to move forward on. Again, they kind of wrap up some of our past discussions, but also provide an eye to the future and where this district needs to head going forward. I'm happy to entertain as we fine tune this and we fine tune our goals this year and we collaborate together during the retreat. Other focus areas may fall out, but I would like to sink our collective teeth into those three areas because I do think they're interrelated and they're very important, to the future of the school district. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tice. Are there any questions from the board for Dr. Tice?
Marissa, I don't have a question. I just, if nobody else does, I wasn't sure what was going to be in reports tonight. I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge the day after our last board meeting, we lost one of our very long-term teachers who taught at Pleasant Street, Mott Road, Enders, Eagle Hill, Gail Moreland. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the great work that she did in this district over a great many years.
Thank you for that, Dan. If you have the memorial information, please share that with the board.
Wow.
Thank you. Oh, in case anyone's wondering why I'm at the district office, my internet went out and I needed to get someplace very quick where I can get online. So that's why I'm here, socially distancing from everyone else. All right, next on the agenda, item 2.04, committee and representative reports. First up, audit committee, Chairperson Wheeler.
Thanks, Marissa. Well, we met with Katie Phillips in advance of her appearance here tonight at the board meeting, and I think the committee is very happy with the work she's been doing for us. And as you can tell, she's very experienced, so we're in good hands there. We also reviewed our audit charter and approved it as it stood. Our meeting was cut short, as you've read, by the power outage. So we did approve the response letter for the CAP for the comptroller's office, which I think you have a copy of it in your email, correct, Bill? Yes, everyone received that. And that's it until we meet again.
Thank you, Daryl. Are there any questions for Daryl in regards to the audit committee's meeting? All right, community relations is scheduled to meet tomorrow. Facilities committee, looks like the last meeting was October 1st. Dr. Tice, is there any additional updates since that meeting that you wanted to share?
Other than what I mentioned earlier, we are meeting with the principals individually. They will come back to the facilities committee as we have discussed, one at a time. It's really an opportunity. It's not a competition. It's really taking a look at the big picture and the maximum cost allowances and trying to prioritize the needs going forward. So I think that will be important for the facilities committee to hash out. I know that Mr. Furlong will be working with all of us on requests for proposals for construction management in advance of a pre-referendum. That is equally important. It's not an indictment of our current construction management firm. It's just the nature of the business in terms of a pre-referendum decision that needs to be made as the new construction manager or the returning construction manager, depending on how it all sorts out, helps to plan ahead for the facilities improvement. That being said, we would do architect request for proposal for architects at the time that we do our next building condition survey, which is scheduled for 2023. As all of you know, they used to be on 5-year cycles. One would think it would be 2020 again, but they ended up working with the different districts and trying to parse a lot out to make it a little bit more manageable for the state ed department, Department of Facilities Planning. So that being said, I think we have a lot on our plate as we kind of work backwards from a proposed referendum date with the architects. And I think it helps that the current project is in full swing. A lot of progress has been made, and I would like to reiterate what I said earlier, that our construction management firm currently, DGA, would like to give you a grand tour. I know Facilities Committee had a chance to see a sneak preview, but I really think you will be impressed of all the work that's been done. In fact, I know it was a hardship on our families and children and teachers to have to keep Wellwood shuttered while National Grid did the power transfer, switching out the switchgear. But at the same time, I know our construction management firm worked with our contractors to do some of the heavy lifting, pun intended, with the structural steel in the lobby area. That would have been a visual distraction for the students in the building had they been in attendance. So they literally and figuratively killed two birds with one stone to choreograph that during the same time that National Grid was hard at work. And so I applaud the efforts of everybody trying to get a foothold, and the old adage, to make hay while the sun shines. So a lot of work was done, and I know that our construction management firm is eager to show that off to all of you. So I know the hard hats are ready, and we would love to take you on a tour. So I don't know if this is the time to check your calendars or to do that offline, but I would be happy to be the intermediary to set up a tour for all of you to be able to take a look at it. It's amazing the progress that they've been able to put forward. Thank you.
Rather than do that now, why don't we have a couple of dates sent out to the board, a doodle calendar, and we could find a time that works for everyone.
I just want to add,
Dan, did you? Oh, go ahead.
I just want to interject on that. So you have the minutes from our last meeting. I just want to make one clarification on that. If anybody goes through those, there's a number of things that are identified by dollar item as priority 1 and priority 2 items. That was a preliminary determination that was made by the architects as they went through the entire menu of possible items, and is not the product of what our educators have put on that list or building principles. So that's the next phase to come, where they really come back, as Dr. Tice talked about, in terms of what we need in terms of programmatic needs as opposed to infrastructure. So don't read too deeply into what's identified as priority 1 or priority 2 in those meeting minutes, because that's far from determined at this point.
Thank you. And I'm not going to forget this time. Finance, Mark.
Well, I thank you, Marissa. I'd like to thank Bill and his staff for providing their best guesstimates of how the 2021 fiscal year is going to end up. Two biggest areas of concern are the governor's proposal that state aid would be reduced 20%. It's kind of been haphazard so far. Some aid has not been cut, others have. And we're really early in our fiscal year in which we normally receive state aid. So that's something that's going to take a while to determine. Also, a big unknown out there is any additional stimulus money. And as anybody that has watched TV lately knows, there's a lot of politicking going on. So the likelihood of any stimulus money coming sooner rather than later is slim to none. So we keep our fingers crossed and we forge ahead. So that'll be developing over the next couple months. And then I think you'll find further on the agenda, Bill put together a budget calendar that we will be looking to enact going forward. But that's the gist of it.
Thank you, Mark. Bill, did you want to add anything?
Oh, I really have nothing to add to Mark's comments on the Finance Committee meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, policy is meeting tomorrow. Education Foundation, Sherry?
Meeting on Wednesday, and I'll report back at our next meeting, at our next board meeting.
Okay, and then our legislative liaisons have some information for us later on the agenda in regards to the NYSBA resolutions, unless there was something that either one of you wanted to interject right now. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, we will have our student board member at our next board meeting. So very excited about that. And I did talk to her about putting together her report. She's just very excited, and it's great to have her on board. All right, moving on, item 3.01, approval of the minutes of the September 21st regular board meeting. Is there a motion that the Board of Education of the Fayetteville-Manlius School District approve the minutes of the regular meeting held on Monday, September 21st as presented? Thank you, Sherry. A second from Mark. Any discussion of those minutes?
Yeah, just one quick clarification. If I remember, one of the two sets, I think it was this set, indicated that it was held virtually. That was our, excuse me, our last in-person meeting.
Exactly.
Okay, we'll make that change. Anything further on the September 21st meeting minutes? All right. Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes with the change from virtual to in-person? All right. Anyone opposed or abstaining? All right, and 3.02, approval of the minutes from October 5th. Is there a motion of the Board of Education of the Fayetteville-Manlius Central School District approve the meetings of a special meeting held on Monday, October 5th as presented? Thank you, Rebecca, and a second from Daryl. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand and indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? Okay. Next on the agenda, item 3.03, personnel actions. Is there a motion of the Board of Education of the Fayetteville-Manlius School District to approve the personnel actions as recommended by the superintendent? Thank you, Daryl, and a second from Jason. All those in favor, please raise your hand, indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? Next on the agenda, item 3.04, approval of the audit response and corrective action plan. Is there a motion of the Board of Education of the Fayetteville-Manlius Central School District hereby approve the district's response and corrective action plan resulting from the State Comptroller's audit of RFP services? Thank you, Kelly, and a second from Mark. Any discussion from the board? All those in favor, please raise your hand and indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? All right, next on the agenda, item 3.05, review of the budget calendar. Bill, I believe that will be you, or Dr. Tice, which one of you will be taking that? You're muted, Bill.
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
The budget calendar that is before the board is very similar to last year. As you well know, many of the dates are outlined in New York State regulation. We all have the same vote date, the third Tuesday each May, and a lot of the key deadlines are pegged off that third Tuesday of May date. The one difference that I did want to point out is last year we had 3 budget workshops. The first one being in October, which was really a workshop on how the budget is constructed. The other 2 were later in the year once budget development had begun in earnest. One was in January to review the revenue side of the budget, and then another one in May to review the expenditure side. We're looking at a fairly difficult budget year this next year. So we felt that it would probably be in the best interest of everybody to have the first budget workshop at the end of January to review revenue, and then have 2 budget workshops in March so that the budget can be thoroughly reviewed by the Board of Education and adjusted if we need to make budget reductions or other changes to the budget in earnest. Other than that, there's really not much of a difference in the calendar. We are looking at trying to compress the budget development process. The building administrators and department supervisors will still have as much time as they've always had to do their work. However, we are planning on constructing the payroll and benefits budget earlier this year so we can have a first pass, not at the end of February, but as close to February 1st as possible. We are planning on issuing I know the budget calendar says that the budget documents will be sent out to those people who have budget responsibility at the end of this month, we're actually looking at getting that out at the end of this week.
Thank you, Bill. Questions, comments from the board in regards to the proposed budget calendar? So Bill, this would come back to the board at our next meeting for approval. Is that your plan?
That is correct.
Okay.
Bill, I just had a question. I mean, so in terms of the timeline, I know you've moved some things up and kind of changed what the budget workshops look like a little bit, but from a process perspective, other than really trying to do things earlier and getting additional passes, is there anything, is your approach any different this year, given the financial constraints we're anticipating?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're working on, as you know, we put out what's called a quota system where we can, you know, whether it's instructional supplies or textbook money or any other money that's spent at the building level, we put out quotas so that, you know, it's fair, because there are differences in enrollment from one elementary building to the next or one middle school to the next. So this way we can keep it even based upon the number of students in each building. We are looking at, you know, last year, very late in the game, before we finalized the budget, we did reduce instructional supplies by about 20% across the board. Now, we were able to carry over some of that money from last year to this year to pretty much offset those reductions. But we are probably looking at establishing the budget based upon that lower amount once again, and kind of freezing the quotas that we had issued last year towards the end of the budget process. That being said, you know, we always take a hard look. You know, we do meet with each building principal and we do meet with each department leader in December, and we review their requests for whether it's instructional technology in the classroom or instructional supplies, furniture and equipment. And we hear all requests, and then we have to, you know, make a decision from there. And we plan on keeping that process the same. So, you know, buildings and departments will still have plenty of opportunity to request the resources they need or feel that they need. And then, you know, the real question this next year is going to be, you know, what will the state revenue picture look like? You know, how much state aid will you receive? What will our tax levy limit look like? You know, right now that's heavily dependent upon inflation, which is running lower than normal, and also growth in taxable value, which we feel may not be that much of a significant increase. So revenue is expected to be very tight this next year. And so we're going to have to really take a hard look at the expenditure side of the budget in order to, you know, balance that budget by the time we present it to voters in May. Did that answer your question, Rebecca?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I was just also wondering, you said the supplies were reduced, that 20% reduction, you were able to, from the carryover, basically offset that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're expecting the same, do you anticipate a reduction in supplies next year that will not be offset?
Well, we're hopeful that, you know, once again, we're tightening our belt this year. And we're taking a hard look at all discretionary spending. Obviously, there's certain money that is required for the educational program. If you're looking at family and consumer science, they need groceries to, you know, operate their curriculum in their classroom. So we will continue to buy what is needed for the classroom. It's just that we're going to take a hard look at what might be discretionary and say, do we really need to buy this year or next? You know, hopefully we're in a situation where we can, you know, save some money and do what we did last year, which was carry over some of that funding into the next school year so that we, you know, can make everybody whole in terms of instructional supplies.
Any further questions or comments from the board? Okay. Moving on then to item 4.01, board development. We'll start with a discussion of the proposed NISBA resolutions for this year. Rebecca and Sherry, or
So we have the NISBA annual business meeting on Halloween at 8:30 in the morning that I am the proud delegate of for our board, representing our board this year. And so I'm hoping that everybody has had a chance to go through the proposed resolutions book. Sherry and I met yesterday, and as you saw our email to Dr. Tice, we just had some questions from the administration that he answered. But I figured rather than reading them, I will just go through number by number, and we'd like to hear from you on whether, starting with the recommended resolutions by the committee, whether there's any that you have an issue with, and we can have discussion as needed. So for the first resolution, did anyone have any comments or discussion points? Okay, number 2. Number 3.
I do on number 2, Rebecca.
Okay.
So this essentially is looking into converting part of this process to a loser pays system, which is not what the crux of our legal system is built on. And one of the reasons it isn't, and one of the reasons that I have concern on this one, is that it would present a significant disincentive for any economically challenged families to bring the disputes that they may feel are proper or necessary on behalf of their children, for fear of, if they don't prevail, they're going to get hit not only with the costs that they would incur in doing it, but also paying any district costs. And I think that really creates a very unlevel playing field when we talk about equity among our students and families. And that's the primary reason why the bulk of our legal system is not a loser pays system in this country. And I would not be supportive of that becoming a loser pays system when advocating for our special needs students.
Yeah, that was my same concern. I mean, my comment to myself here was, recover attorney's fees, but from whom? So I can't imagine that the state's going to chip in to cover the fees if, a family loses. So it would be on that family. So for that reason, because, I just didn't see any more specificity about that, I would oppose it just for the same reason that Dan.
Thank you. Can I hear from others on that? Those are good arguments against it. Can we all get behind opposing resolution 2? Is anyone strongly in favor of that proposed resolution?
I can get behind opposing it.
Opposing?
Oppose.
Okay, I'm sensing consensus. So we will oppose number 2. Number 3 was one we did ask Craig and the team about the language, which they were fine with. Anyone have an objection to this resolution?
This to me is somewhat similar.
Yeah.
That I'd really like to hear from Lisa a little bit, or Craig, if we could, on this. I would think that we would never be making a decision in our district, at least, with regard to special education determinations that wouldn't meet a burden of proof in a matter. I don't think that we would historically ever be making decisions in this district that wouldn't meet that threshold in any event. So I'm not sure how this serves the students of our district.
I think to your point, and Lisa can jump in here too, I mean, I agree with your decision on resolution 2, but resolutions 3, I think, helps balance too, in terms of frivolous cases that are brought forward. The burden of proof would be on the party bringing the complaint going forward. But you're right. I mean, the district still has a high bar and would have to be able to defend what they did, why they did it. But the burden would be on the person bringing the case forward to try to eliminate any frivolous challenges.
I guess just in terms of, again, I'm trying to focus this on a narrow window of FM. Is that an issue that we're seeing in this district? Is frivolous claims being brought on behalf of our special ed students, as opposed to, meritorious claims sometimes prevail and sometimes don't on both sides. That's the way the system works. But I'm really curious whether we actually have a frivolous claims issue in FM.
I can answer that. And as you are well aware, we have not had an impartial hearing in a long time. And the last that we did have was a 504 case. And with a 504 case, the burden of proof is on the parent, not the school district. That's a variation from IDEA and 504. So no, we don't. We have had some frivolous cases in past years, not in the more recent. But I do think it's for IDEA and children with disabilities. It is. I think it's appropriate for the district to not have the burden of proof. We would always defend, and as you said, there's so many rights in terms of due process, in terms of mediation and a resolution meeting before you get to an impartial hearing. So it's always been our practice to try to work things out, but I don't think it's a bad thing for the party, the suing party, to have, which is either the parent or an advocate, to be the one to have the burden of proof.
One thing about the resolutions, I think these both came from Morrisville-Eaton, which is a small rural district, which of considerable less means, I would say, than FM. So when the body of the NISBA organization, when all the school districts look at the resolution, the idea is to consider all districts, whether it's going to impact a rural district, a suburban district like FM, or whatever district it is, just to consider not just how it's going to affect FM, but for the good of all school districts. So I think that's a consideration that I know that is from serving on the resolutions committee, how they approach these resolutions, not just looking at how it's going to fit one particular district, but overall how it's going to serve the needs of all districts and children in the state.
I guess this is probably not a quick question, but not knowing the history of why the burden shifted back in, what was it, 2007, 2008 to the districts? I mean, is there like a quick, I don't know, summary on why that happened in the first place? And I don't know if that's something you can even speak to, Lisa or Craig.
I think that was, I'm not sure if that was one of the reauthorization times or not, but no, I don't know. I can certainly research that for you if you'd like.
Yeah, we can research it.
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on the rest of the board, but yeah, there's something about this that gives me pause, but I'm willing to, support the consensus of the board.
Well, we have time, so if it would help you, Kelly, and others, as we mull this one over, perhaps we could get that answer and we could revisit this. But it sounds like at least you and Dan were not in favor or tentative about, at least.
Yeah, but I'm happy, honestly, if it's just me, I can do a little bit of my own research. I know you guys are swamped with other things, so I'm happy to look into it myself, and then I can get back to the rest of the board for whoever might be interested.
I mean, I found the statistic, I don't know if this is really a rationale, but the statistic that 40% of all cases, that these cases were filed in New York State the year that the burden shifted was sort of staggering, but.
I just look at that a little bit carefully now because I don't know the basis of the statistics and can't help but wondering how much of that comes out of New York City public schools that then carries over to the rest of the state. And what, the rationale was burden and cost. And
right.
And I understand these are statewide things, but our obligation first and foremost is to our district. And I haven't seen or heard that this is a burden or cost issue at FM specifically.
But I do hear the administration saying they would support this burden shifting for all cases of special ed. So, what do other people want to weigh in at this point?
Yeah, I would support our administrators. As Lisa said, there are many steps along the way before you get to this point. So it should be solvable. The burden should be on the party seeking the fees, not the district.
Yeah, I would tend to lean towards the administrators on this issue. I just, quite frankly, am not educated enough in this area. So I'd rely on their experience. And I know we enjoy having attorneys on the board, so I appreciate their perspective as well. But like I said, I would tend to lean on administration's recommendation on this issue.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, Rebecca, I would follow kind of the other comments and going with the administration on this. To Mark's point, I'm not an expert in this area and definitely defer to the attorneys that are on the board for your guys' guidance on this.
Yeah, well, I guess we could go either direction. Anyone else? Thanks, Jason.
I think one of the challenges with this is you have the entity, the district with the district's finances, and then you have the community. And we're really here to represent both. And I think anytime you look at an entity, if you have an opportunity to make the burden less for that entity and the cost less for that entity as an economic issue alone, that's the direction you go in. But when you're looking at what's in the best interest of the community members, it may be the other side of that scale. So that's where I'm coming with is it's an obvious answer from the corporate district side, business side of things. But I think it's not quite necessarily the same answer when you're looking at it from the student and parent perspective. And that's why I'm struggling with this one.
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca, you're muted.
Sorry, I haven't heard from Marissa. You're muted now. Okay.
I would tend to go with the administrators. Again, I just point out that I know we look at things from an FM perspective, but the resolutions are intended to benefit all students and districts across the state. And I don't think it takes, there are quite a few regulations and laws that protect our students' rights. And I don't think this is going to hinder anyone from seeking remedy from any issue that they felt was done wrong to them. But I do think it's helpful to all districts to have something like this in place. And I think with the administrative recommendation, I would support the administrators on this one.
Right. I think that looks like a majority decision unless, I mean, we're looking for consensus on this. So can we move forward?
I'm fine with moving forward based on the majority.
Okay. Dan, are you okay with it?
Well, I mean, consensus is what consensus is.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on. Thank you. So number 4 looks like a no-brainer to Sherry and I in terms of including mandating local IDAs to include affected school districts in the development of pilot agreements. Does anyone oppose that? Okay. Number 5, any comments? Number 6, Sherry.
This one, it's a very broad statement that supports proposals to expand opportunity for the capacity for online learning. And we as a board signed off on a letter to our governor earlier this year saying that we have to do limited online learning expansions and really focus on the teachers and the students in the district and their relationships and being in person. Later on, there's a resolution that mentions infrastructure, which I'm all in support of, making sure that we have the infrastructure for everyone to have access to online learning opportunities. But a broad expanding opportunities for online learning, I think, goes against the position we took in the spring.
I agree. I had the same exact thought.
And Sherry's referring to number 17 as the resolution that's similar but targeted to broadband and devices. I would also support that, opposing that resolution on those grounds. Let's hear from other people. Mark?
Yeah, I can't help thinking this is kind of a veiled attempt to push more online learning, depending upon how they want to expand their definition of, the next shoe to drop, whether it be a pandemic or something else. I don't really see a need for it, to be honest with you.
I'd agree.
I agree as well. My concern is, that these opportunities that they mention in here should be something that all school districts can provide in person to their students. Students should not have to go online to have foreign language courses. They shouldn't have to go online to participate in advanced placement courses, et cetera. So I think we should be supporting and pushing for school districts to be properly funded so that kids, no matter what district they're in, have those opportunities in person in their school districts.
I think we're with number 6. That's what we're talking about, right? I'm sorry, I got distracted for a moment. When I read this, I thought first back to the discussions that we had at that emergency board meeting on a Sunday when we went out on COVID, and remembering that this was, as I understood it, at least the primary concern raised at that time by the FMTA. And I wouldn't want to go out and be supporting something in this context that would be against what we've heard from them without having had a discussion or some agreement in the alternative with them on doing that.
Okay. I think we have consensus on this unless anyone has a different feeling, different opinion. So that's the second resolution I will oppose in this category. Number 7, incorporating pre-K funding into the school aid formulas used for K-12 education.
Again, just to the FM world, I'd love to hear from Bill what his thoughts are of how that would or wouldn't impact us.
Yeah, I had the same question.
I don't see how it would get back to us. And, it basically would allow districts to take that funding, roll it in. My concern on it would be that then there'd be a smaller pie for everybody else, especially on the kindergarten, because the kindergarten incentive aid, only lasts 1 year. So if that would be rolled in and become permanent aid increase to a district, once again, the pie is kind of shrinking here. And I just wonder if that's in the best interest of all districts.
So are you saying it might be in the best interest of no district or just the districts that have pre-K?
Yeah, I think, once again, I think that, let me say it a different way. I think it's in the best interest of those districts who are going to put in a full day kindergarten program or already have a pre-K program.
Yeah. So there's sort of an inherent tension on, this is probably not, according to Bill, best for our district, but do we want to support universal pre-K around the state? And what do people think on this one?
My very broad thought that I mentioned to you the other day is that this is something that I know we've been pushing to get the state aid formula revamped for a long time, and it doesn't happen. So it would be great to have this as a NISBA, something for NISBA to push for, but I don't see it happening, especially in today's financial world. I don't see that it's they can push for it, but I don't see it's something that will happen. But that's not, that's me looking into my crystal ball. So, but yes, I would still go with supporting other people being able to have pre-K funding.
I agree with your point, Sherry, that's not likely, but I definitely would support or do support the universal pre-K program. I think it's something that's very much needed in a lot of communities. So I'm in favor.
Yeah, I'm conflicted too, because I think early education is very important, but if it were going to hurt us, then there's my conflict, but I'll go with the majority.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to see our district be a good citizen, if you can call a district a citizen. So maybe this is one of the ways that we help advocate for those districts that, have less resources than we do. I certainly think universal pre-K is, probably going to go a long way to helping mitigate disparities. So I would support it.
So I guess I have a quick, I guess, Mark, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'll support it. I guess, Craig, my question would be back to you. If this were to ever change, would we then go back and look at instituting this within our district?
My understanding, and I can go to the resident historians here with Jeff and Mary. I mean, as you know, FM was one of the last districts to make the move from half-day kindergarten to full-day kindergarten. I think our community has always relished being able to keep the children at home and not to rush childhood going forward. Many communities, pre-K is very critical in terms of getting the kids off on the right foot. But again, I think FM, we eventually moved to full-day kindergarten with a lot of other districts that were doing very well and were holdouts. I do not see this as incentivizing pre-K for the local community, if that's what you're asking. Mary, Jeff, in terms of history here, has this been discussed in the past?
Lisa technically has been here longer than both Mary and myself, unless you're counting our high school years. So Lisa, I'll let Lisa answer. It hasn't been a discussion while I've been here. I think it was 2014-15 we went to full day kindergarten, and prior to that, there was no discussion that I recall.
I would add that we've certainly had conversations that there are very definitely students in our community who could benefit from a formal pre-K program, but it was a challenge in itself to get full day kindergarten with staffing, facilities, et cetera. And we do have many very high quality pre-K programs in our community that our students participate in.
And we also did a parent survey years ago on when universal pre-K first came out, and resoundingly, the parents really did not want that. They wanted to be, as you said, Craig, be in control of either having their children home or depending on their own pre-K, but parents were not for it at the time.
Thank you for the background and the history on that. Appreciate it.
Right,
For the
well,
record, I was adding Jeff and Mary's time as students in the district as well. So you're not going to get off that easy.
Of course you were.
Well, then I beat Lisa by a mile.
all right, I'm gathering consensus on this resolution, I think. So let's move on to number 8. Opposing proposals to raise the number of charter schools in the state. Is anyone opposed to this resolution? Okay. Number 9. Number 10. Number 11. Number 12. 13. 14. Yeah, go ahead, Kelly. I'm sorry. I wasn't looking at.
No,
hands.
no,
Yeah,
I'm just
I'm looking at my other
checking,
screen.
like, wait, is that the one I wanted to say something about?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess this one kind of relates to, like, I don't know. I mean, whatever happened to our resolution? So should we be like trying to add language to this? Maybe we should have proposed our resolution again? I mean, I know there were issues with that and the, you know.
So the resolution that we presented 2 years ago in 2018, it did pass, and it is still on NISBA's. I don't know if they have a big book of policy of things that they support and things they don't, but it's still there. And I don't know how long it lasts, but I do know that it's still, it hasn't expired yet. So
okay, great.
it's
That's
still
what
there. We don't have to re-up it. This is just seems to be a very specific incident that occurred where windstorm knocked out power in a district. So they had to make, on the spot, they had to make some changes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Very specific. All right, number 15 is one that Dr. Tice weighed in on and was okay with the language.
So the only thing I didn't really, the only thing that jumped out at me was there's a little bit of a difference between the proposed resolution and the rationale.
Yeah.
In that I don't have any concern about if there was a training and certification program for parent advocates, but the rationale then talked about a requirement that advocates be trained and certified. And I think there's a big difference. And again, that's a cost issue. You know, there are lots of families that have both special ed students and significant economic challenges, whether related to that or the needs or not. And it just puts one more burden on them if they're required in order to obtain any advocacy. Now it has to be somebody who's certified and trained, which, you know, it just, every time you do this, you introduce additional costs into the process and or burdens into the process. And I think that there's enough burdens in that area that adding additional ones, I think, are just not necessary. It's great if there's a certification program.
Right.
Not in favor of a required certification.
Yeah. Sherry, did I not say the same thing to you?
You did, and you noticed the discrepancy there as well.
Yeah, and so, I mean, we might oppose this resolution just based on the ambiguity.
Yeah, I had the same exact thought. I don't think it should be required, and like, who would do the training, who would do the certifying, and, you know, if that's a thing that's available, that's great, but then who would pay for it? But I definitely don't think it should be required. So without further clarification, I wouldn't support it as written.
Yeah.
I think it's great to have the training, but I do have concerns about having it be required. It sounds like something that folks in Albany would see as a good idea and then require school districts to pay for and not give any funding for. So yes, I would definitely not be in favor of having this or passing this one.
I'll support the consensus.
I would agree.
Okay. Great. So we'll move on to 16. Yep. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. I hear someone. No, I don't. Okay. 16 was also We also asked Dr. Tice on that one. '17 is the other and very different digital divide resolution, which I think we were in support of in our previous conversation about the other resolution, which we're not in support of. 18, I would think would be our strongest. Opposing mid-year state aid cuts. I'm not going to ask for consensus on that. 19. Okay, 19 was Craig's comment on that was that you would like to see an annual training, but not every 3 years, because that would be an administrative nightmare. Is that correct?
Yeah, we discussed it as a district office team this morning, so we appreciated the prompt ahead of time. It gave us a chance to have a great discussion. It would be a record-keeping nightmare because of our hires coming in at different times and trying to make sure that they had it. It would almost be easier to do something annually, even if we broke up the training to get into some type of ebb and flow. I think it would allow it to, the updates to take place, the refresher to happen. But at the same time, as I indicated in my response to the board, you don't want to say one area is more important than another, and that somehow child abuse is every 3 years while others require annual training. There isn't a significant amount of time, as Mr. Gordon pointed out, that our faculty and staff are undergoing training at the beginning of every year. This would certainly add to it, but at the same time, it's just as important as the other areas in which we're trained as well. So it's the 3-year cycle that is problematic for us, not the providing of the training.
Now, interestingly, the wording here, it just says that the NISBA would recommend the adoption of a board policy, and we actually do already have a board policy. So as much as we can oppose it because it does talk about the once every 3 years, we could make our policy to say once a year, as per your recommendation.
Well, that was what came out. This was not advocating for legislation on this. This was advocating for putting out a policy that each board of ed has the ability to adopt, not adopt, modify, or do as they wish. So, it didn't jump out as me as a concern. I certainly understand what the concern is, but since it's not a legislative push, it's just hey, give us a draft that we can choose what to do with or not do with, and it wasn't as concerning to me.
And perhaps for other districts, perhaps that would be a useful policy for districts that don't have these policies in place already. So can we have consensus on supporting this, given that it wouldn't really be binding on us in any way? Okay. So moving to 20 through 27, these are all resolutions that were not recommended by the committee. I'll just ask you in a blanket fashion if there's any that you would like to see that were not recommended in this grouping.
Sure, but not enough to argue about here.
Which one, Kelly?
Healthcare coverage, but again,
Okay.
those can be, if they're not going to be taken up or recommended by NISBA, then I don't think it's worth the.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? So we've narrowed down to number 2, number 6, and number 15 that we would oppose. Thank you, everyone.
Great job.
Thank you both.
I'll go to the meeting in costume.
Good plan.
That is a great plan. Thank you very much for your hard work on that. The next item under board development is our November 5th board retreat. So we have 2 board goals that we need to start unpacking and just initially looking at as far as direction and where we might want to start with approaching these goals. In our last conversation about the goals, we did discuss that these are likely not goals just for a year. There may be additional time that's needed on these goals. So we have a great facilitator who is very experienced in the issues that our goals that are related to our goals, who we coming in to work with the board. So I just want to get a framework of what board expectations may be for this initial meeting. And again, it is an initial meeting. And talking to Dr. Brown, he thought maybe unpacking the goals, everyone getting some consensus as to what our intentions are, and some direction that we might want to branch out in. Rebecca sent the email about the New York State Ed culturally responsive sustaining education framework as another possibility of a direction that we could take in looking at the goals and the retreat. So it's a lot, these goals, and we're certainly not going to resolve anything on November 5th. It's to get started.
Well, I admittedly have not read through the whole framework, but that was recommended to me by someone who works kind of in the equity field in education to take a look at. But it seems like it would be helpful to get a frame around what is the role of the board versus what is the role of the administration. I mean, what impact can we make towards achieving our goal, and what would be overstepping, just so we can be clear on what we're working towards. And so I think that framework document could have some valuable information in there. And I would think our superintendent, as well as our facilitator, could help guide that conversation and provide clarity. And then just throwing out the question of where does our book fit into this retreat or future retreats? Because I think I've read the book, there's a lot in there. Do we want to have the facilitator focus us in on a chapter or 2 to discuss? Or is that right for our first meeting? I'm not sure, but I think getting on the same page about kind of those working definitions and the theory behind that book would be one piece.
My opinion.
Sorry, go ahead, Sherry.
No, I was about the book. I was going to bring up the same thing, but my opinion is that as board members, we should have read or at least be familiar with what the content of the book is, even if it doesn't become a part of our agenda, part of our discussion. It's something that we've all agreed to, to focus on for as something we know for the year, something we will learn this year. So I think it kind of is a deadline to do it beforehand. And then I know last year we did a sort of book club with all of the administrative teams. So that could be a separate time when we actually discuss the book. But I do think we should have that already read by the time we have our retreat.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's important. I mean, I think I skimmed through that framework, Rebecca, that you sent. So it's actually, I think, really probably a good place for us to wrap our head around. And I like the idea of kind of discussing the different roles that we have to play, in terms of the board versus the administration. I also think it's important, to Sherry's point, that we all have read the book, because it does kind of level set, at least in terms of definitions. And so we're all, I think if maybe Dr. Brown could give kind of maybe some introduction as to the terminology in this field, so that we are all on the same page. Whether we go through the whole, I don't think we'd have the time or want to maybe go through the book that, on that day. But, I think it always helps to make sure that we're all as much on the same page as we can when it comes to the terminology and, the broader pieces of this that we're going to be working on.
On your recommendation, Rebecca, I also looked at the framework. There are actually, I think it's pages 36 through 38 that I think pertain particularly to the board. I just printed those, and of course I can't put my hand on them right now, but those are useful. But I agree with Kelly. We can't do the whole book perhaps, but maybe that first chapter that's just about definitions. Even if, we need a place to start. But are we going to have a conversation with our administrative team as well at some point, or is that not in the planning?
I thought it was helpful last year. I mean, I would recommend it again. I think they found value in it, and I think the governance team found value in it.
No,
I would just hope that the pandemic would allow for it.
Maybe
We could do an online book club if we have to.
Sure. I thought it was beneficial for all of us. I enjoyed it very much. But
Oh, and just to point out, I think the framework actually has some definitions in it as well. So I think it's towards the end somewhere. So that might be helpful for us all to look at as well.
You got further than I did.
And the author's book talk is with Focal is on Wednesday at 7 p.m. So I would think that's bonus time. But if some of our board members could watch that, that might also be a great platform to engage in discussion.
So not to give a lot of homework ahead of the meeting, but it seems that we should have the book, everyone should have the book, or at least that first chapter done before, ideally the whole book, we've had it a while, but definitely the first chapter before we meet, and read through the framework. And then optional, but certainly I think would be very beneficial, would be that Wednesday, I think it's Syracuse, I think it's the Onondaga County Library who's sponsoring that discussion with the author. So that I think it would be a good something to do before we have our meeting. Anyone who hasn't given any weighed in yet, any thoughts about the retreat?
I have a logistics question. So are we committed to doing this remotely, or is this something that could be done in person? We don't have the technology concerns and issues because it's a retreat, not a public meeting. And just sometimes I think some of these discussions are more valuable, more productive in person.
I asked the board, so I'm open to what the board would like to do in that regards. I'm not sure what space we would use in order to do that. Certainly not the conference center where we have had our last few retreats, wouldn't accommodate social distancing. But if there are other ideas, especially since we don't have the, as you pointed out, Dan, the need to live stream the retreat.
We did our book discussion last year in a cafeteria, and I think that could lead to a retreat as well. We could each have our own table or something.
I think obviously whichever location would have the least impact on facilities, the ones that jumped to mind for me were obviously cafeteria or library media center or the atrium area at Eagle Hill. I know there's been a lot of meetings. I believe there's been a lot of meetings held in the atrium area. There's a lot of space there. And I think there may be a greater value to some of this in person than online.
I'd rather do it in person.
Is there anyone opposed to us doing it in person? Because if not, we could just go and look for a space to have it.
Yeah, I mean, I think my concern again is just preparing for school the next day because I think it's a Thursday, correct? So I just don't want to be in the way of any of the cleaning crews or, messing up logistics that way. I mean, I know obviously having these sensitive discussions is, probably better in person, but, I also want to be sensitive to the fact that school needs to be operated the next day.
We're also adding, Dr. Brown is coming from Ithaca, which is about, was that an hour and 45 minutes away? So we're on, is it, no?
It's an hour.
Hour and 15 maybe.
An hour and 15 minutes. So we are adding some time to him, his commute to come back and forth from Ithaca to facilitate.
Has he indicated that he would be willing to come in person, or have you not had that discussion, Marissa?
I have not had that discussion with him, but I will ask him if he is available to come in person.
I'm not opposed to it. I struggle because I find masked meetings hard to read people's expression and usually can hear, but if we're really spaced out, I just feel like you gain something and you lose something. So I still think we could have a really good retreat online and be able to fully see faces. But if the consensus is to do it in person, I will absolutely participate in person.
That's a good
Okay.
point. I do sometimes struggle hearing people with a mask on because I think I count more on lip reading than I think I do.
Well, I think those are three really good reasons for staying virtual. One is the sensitivity to our custodial staff. Two is the difficulty of hearing and understanding people's faces with masks. And what was the third one? Dr. Brown would have to do a long travel. So, I mean, he's being generous with his time as it is, correct?
Yes. You know,
I would say
either
virtual.
right. I think finding a space where we are all 6 feet apart and, you know, paying attention to the needs of the custodial staff is going to be challenging. I don't like meetings with masks on because it is hard to read what people are feeling. And this is a topic where I think we really need to know what people are feeling, because this is a pretty sensitive area that we're going to be getting into. So maybe at least this first initial one, having it virtually at least, and see how it goes. And if it's not working out, then switching or looking for an opportunity to do it in person. Of course, that depends on what the follow-up meeting is. If we decide to do a follow-up meeting with administrators, well then, you know, it's definitely going to have to be virtual. So is everyone okay with doing the initial one virtually, or is there a strong sentiment from the board that we move forward and have it in person? Okay, I'm not hearing anyone say that they are.
I say virtual.
Okay. All right. So in terms of getting back to Dr. Brown and shaping up an agenda, you know, I can certainly tell him about these 3 items that we want to look at before the meeting and discuss. This is our initial meeting where we're looking at these board goals and get some feedback from him. I did mention that we have community relations tomorrow where we can really get into some more detail about the agenda and then get a draft agenda out to the board ahead of the meeting. That sound doable to everyone? Okay, great. Alrighty. Next on the agenda then, if there's nothing further on board development, item 4.02, I don't see anything under working agenda items. 4.03, potential considerations for future meetings. We should add, oh no, that's 4.03, I don't see anything there. 5.01, future meeting agendas. And anything for future meeting agendas? Do we want to try to schedule some of the board the budget workshops? I'm sorry, Jason, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to know, where did we ever land with at our last meeting? So I guess I'll ask it here. I don't know if it needs to be a future agenda topic, but we were trying to take care of the issue with the logos for the homeschool association so they could do those sales. And I think Dr. Tice was reaching back to legal. Did that ever come to resolution? I don't know that it needs to come back in front of us, but did that issue get resolved?
Not yet. Well, yes and no. We're still waiting to hear back from legal on that. But as far as the HSAs, they're moving forward because the mask is over the Hornet. They're using a stock image, public domain, that they've worked out with the vendor to be able to go forward. They would still be interested in something, possibly another fundraiser in the spring. And so if we can have this worked out in a timely fashion, I think they will try to capitalize on something in the spring.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so item 5.02 dates to remember. Obviously, we have our retreat date on November 5th. I have from 6 to 9 as the time. Was anyone interested in starting a little earlier? I can check and see if Dr. Brown's available a little earlier, or do you want to keep it with 6 to 9? I know 9 is sort of the tipping off point where people are
I
get a
could
little
do it earlier.
All right, I can check and see if he could do a 5 to 8. Everyone okay with that?
No, Marissa, I'm not available before 5:30.
5:30 seems
On the
more,
5th.
I think 5:30 seems more realistic.
Okay, I'll check and see if he could do that. All right, next on the agenda, item 6.01, the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented? Thank you, Daryl, and a second from Jason. All those in favor, please state aye. Raise your hand. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? All right, we do not have anything for executive session tonight. Is there a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Mark, and a second from Dan. Any discussion? No. All right, great meeting, very informative. Thank you again, Rebecca and Sherry, for your work on the resolutions. All those in favor of adjourning, please raise your hand, indicate aye. Aye. Anyone opposed or abstaining? All right, great meeting, guys.